Hi everyone, I'm Tom and today I'm going to be showing you how to play the Pillars of Heracles. In this game you lead a Greek city-state that is navigating the archaic period of ancient Hellas. This era witnessed the Greeks' pioneering spirit as they explored new land and established settlements along the vast Mediterranean shoreline. Your goal is to guide your people to greatness and ascend as the most glorious city-state of them all. We'll do this by recruiting characters, constructing buildings and monuments, deploying and commanding units, settling new territories, trading resources for powerful upgrades, and seeking divine favour. Secure your triumph by masterfully controlling cities and regions, fulfilling ancient prophecies, and erecting awe-inspiring monuments to stand the test of time. Pillars of Heracles is coming to Kickstarter, and while this should be very representative of what the final game will look like, it is a prototype. There are some 3D printed pieces. There is a link to the campaign page in the description. I'll put it in the corner of the screen now. So when the campaign is live, it will take you there and you can see all of the final stuff. I'll also be explaining the basic game. There are a number of extra modes, some variants. We can add barbarians to the game. We can play a skirmish mode that's a lot more about fighting. We can give each player heroes with their own special abilities, and there's a mini to represent the hero that you're playing. What I'm going to be showing you here is the standard game. I've set up here for a two-player game. What changes based on the player count is the regions that are blocked off. In a two-player game, two of the regions of the game are basically unavailable. The track for that region we will still move on, but the land will not be explored or built on. And there are cards that are removed at a game with less than 3 players. So zooming in on the player board here, we have got pieces that relate to the various actions we'll take. We have got units, we've got ships, we've got workers and hoplites. They can be deployed out onto the board. We can also build these buildings. There's the temple, the agora, and the citadel. And we can also settle land spaces, and we will place these pillars out on the board, and it's how we can make use of resources in those land spaces. Looking back at the setup, here's my starting city-state. I am Athonai, the Architects of Progress. Once per turn, I get a resource discount when I'm building a building. It also told me the region to start in and a track I got to move up. And you'll see here, and on the main board, it says Mediterranean. There are 2 sides to the main board and all of the player abilities. There is the Aegean Sea on the other side with a different layout and completely different tiles and abilities for that map that you're playing. So being the Athonai, I start in Thraki, which is up here. And you can see I've got my starting city. I've got a pillar, a worker, a hoplite, and a starting resource. This is what my land space produces. And that resource was chosen along with my starting power in the setup. I've also got a ship in an adjacent sea space. So the objective of the game is to gain glory, to become the most glorious city-state of all. You gain glory in the game by controlling regions. They are the big colour-coded groups of spaces. By controlling cities. So at the start of the game, we each control our starting city. Might not end that way. Building monument cards and fulfilling the various prophecies. The game end triggers when players collectively have reached the end of a number of tracks equal to the number of players. So for us, in a 2-player game, as soon as the end is reached of 2 of the tracks, the game end will be triggered. Or when a player controls 6 cities, or when 3 Era 3 prophecy cards have been removed from the board. All of these little prophecy stacks, and again, the blocked out regions for 2 players do not have any prophecy cards on them. These prophecy stacks have a card for Era 1, Era 2, and Era 3. So as soon as these goals have been depleted fully in 3 different regions, that would trigger the end of the game too. During the game, starting with the person who holds the first player marker, we take turns in clockwise order and keep going until that end game is triggered. On your turn, you do a status check and then choose whether you're going to do an advanced turn or a replenish turn. In between the actions of your turn, you can take free actions as well. So first of all, let's look at the status check. This is where you'll assess your progress towards different area-based objectives and claim the rewards you've earned. At the start of the game, nothing will happen in the status check, but eventually things will happen in this step based on things you control. So you can control spaces, just the one little space on the board. You control regions, the big colour-coded groups of spaces on the board, and you can control cities. Controlling a city is easy. You control a city if your marker is on it or it's your starting city of your colour. You control a space if you've got more power in that space than any other player, and your power exceeds the power on any population tiles in the space. We don't know what's on the other side of these population tiles yet until we move in, but we know the range of power we might need to exert control over that space. To control a region, you must have the most power in the entire region, including more than are in any of the population tiles. The population tiles have got to be face up to evaluate control, so if you've never gone to a space in a region and it's still face down, no one can be considered in control of the entire region. So we've talked about controlling means having the most power. Well, how do you get power? Well, workers, agoras, temples, pillars, and cities are all worth 1 power each. Your ships provide a power in the sea space that they're in, but also 1 power to a land space that's adjacent to the sea space that they're in. So a lot of options there. If your ship is in a port instead, it supplies 2 power to the land that it's adjacent to. Your hoplites provide 2 power to the space that they occupy, and citadels provide 3 power. So at the start of the game, I would have 1, 2, 3 for these, another 2 for my hoplite, so that's 5 in total. And if I chose to have my ship provide power to here, we could say I have 6 power in this region to begin with. When power is assigned to land spaces, you can change your mind each turn. You don't have to have your ship always providing the power to one specific place. Cards also have power on them, but this is used to advance on the Rondel and to take actions later. So now we've talked about power and control, let's get back to the status check. If at the start of your turn, your siege tile is out on the board, we resolve the siege. So making up a quick example, let's say that Marty, the green player, has a city in this region and has just left it completely empty. On a previous turn, I placed this siege tile, so in my status check next turn, if I control the space with my siege tile in it, and it contains a city controlled by another player, except from if it's their last city, you can't siege their very last city, then I would win the siege, remove the other player's marker and put mine in. Now normally, a hoplite would be 2 power, the city would only be 1. I am in control, so I would take their player marker out of the city, put mine in instead, and whether or not you won the siege, take your siege tile away. In sieges, you can also use tactical card support. Starting with the player initiating the siege, each player involved can play 1 card from their hand face down for every hoplite and citadel they've got in that space. We reveal all the cards simultaneously, and the power from those cards is added to the player's overall power in the space, and the cards are discarded. We then work out the result of the siege with these new values, and then afterwards, if the losing player used any cards for tactical card support, they redraw the same number of cards into their hand. If there was a siege to be resolved in the status check, you now skip all the other steps of the status check and go on to your turn. If there wasn't a siege though, we can move on to check for domination. If you control a land space where another player has a pillar, so I control here, 2 power to 1, any of their buildings, or a city, you can progress on that region's track. Now, every region in the game has a track on it, even the regions we can't actually access in our game, because for a 2-player game we've tightened things up. You can progress in tracks with the ascend action that we'll talk about later. There are 6 different tracks of the game: Civilization, Navigation, Mercenary, Military, Titan, and Olympian. These tracks are on tiles that are randomized at the start of every game, so the regions can correspond to different tracks in different games. So you would progress on the regions track and receive a reward. Here you would get a mythology card. Up here on the military track, as you progress, you make your different units worth more power. You can get character cards. You can pay extra resources to get access to extra hoplites. Each player has 3 that aren't in the game yet. You can get extra movement for your turns. You can increase your replenish hand size and manipulate how you would move on the Rondel. And all of the tracks have got 2 cities on here, and when somebody reaches certain spaces on the tracks, these cities will be activated. If someone gets to space 5 on the city track, they can put the city down in a place that doesn't already have a city and has at least one of their units, buildings or pillars in it. They pop their marker in it, they suddenly control another city. Remember, 6 triggers the end of the game. When someone gets to space 3 of a track, We check that region to see who has the most power in that region, and that player gets this city to be placed in an appropriate space of that region, so doesn't already have a city in it and has a building, unit, or pillar of theirs. If there's no such space, especially because we are talking about the tracks of the off-limits regions, it could be placed in any region instead. So back to Domination. If you control a land space where another player has a pillar, building, or city, you can progress on that region's track, and we check for every region. Or if you control at least 3 land spaces with the same icon printed on them. You see there's the helmet, the eagle, the cornucopia. If you control at least 3 land spaces with the same icon printed, you can progress 1 step on one of the 2 tracks that contain that icon. You see they've got the icon on the left of the track there. In your status check, you can progress at most once on each of the tracks, even if you have got control everywhere. And you can never go past stage 4 of a track. You can't make it to stage 5 of a track through the status check movement. So now we've covered the status check, let's cover the types of turns. You'll be performing either an advanced turn or a replenish turn. On an advanced turn, you will play an action card from your hand. We start out with basic decks of cards, but as the game progresses, we will buy character and monument cards that will provide us with additional abilities. So in an advanced turn, you'll play a card from your hand. You will advance your player marker on the Rondel exactly the number of spaces equal to the power of the card. So at the start of the game here, everyone starts in Ascend. If I wanted to play this Sailor to begin with, I would definitely be doing a Procure action. If when you do this, there are already player markers in the section of the Rondel you move to, those players all get to draw a card. Then you can perform optional actions. You can use the ability of your card if applicable, not on your starting cards, but later on you'll have an ability you can use. If you have taken Procure, Deploy, Build, or Settle, so basically anything but Ascend, you can do some movement with your units, and you can perform the Rondel's action on the space that you landed on. You can do those things up to once each in any order. If you're not taking an advanced turn, you'll be taking a Replenish Turn, usually when your pillars are on resources and you don't have many cards left. Step 1, you replenish your hand. You can discard any cards left in your hand and then draw back up to your replenish size. This is 5 by default, but is increased by moving up the civilization track. See, it's 5 to begin with, but can become 6 or even 7. Whenever you need to draw cards, but you haven't got a draw pile left, you shuffle your discard pile up. And then you replenish your pillars. Over the course of the game, by spending resources, your pillars will end up on these resource tiles. To replenish them, you just remove all of the pillars from those tiles and the resources are available again. They stay in the same space on the board, but they just go by the side of the resource tile instead of on top of it. Also at this point, if you have any mythology cards that have been invoked, so they're on their side, you can energize any number of them by spending the amount of wine indicated to turn them upright again. Whether it's an advanced turn or a replenish turn, before, in between, after any of the actions that you're taking, you can take any number of free actions. You can invoke a mythology card. So if you have earned a mythology card, let's say that Marty over here has got the Power of Hera, he could invoke this as a free action by turning it on its side, so you'd want to energize it again later. Unity's Embrace, deploy a land unit to a space with one of your cities for free. Usually you got to pay resources. You can also invoke a mythology card once on another player's turn, in between their main actions, not during their status check. You can fulfill a prophecy as a free action. So over here in Hellas, the prophecy says that seas converge at wharfs of fate, and this wants a player to have 2 of their ships in ports in Hellas. If I had done this on my turn as a free action, I can claim that prophecy. It's worth some glory, some points. I take that, put it next to my player board, and we reveal Era 2's prophecy. Artisans etch their path to glory, so you want to have 3 pillars and 2 workers in this region to claim that prophecy. You can only claim prophecies at the end of your turn, and you can only fulfill 1 per turn. And finally, as a free action, you can place your siege tile. If it's not already on the game board, you can place your siege tile in a space that you control that contains at least 1 of your hoplites and a city controlled by another player, except from if it's their only city remaining. So before we have a look at the different actions, let's have a look at movement first. Remember, before or after you do any of the main actions apart from Ascend, so Procure, Deploy, Build, or Settle, Before or after, whether you do the action or not, you can perform as many movements as indicated by your position on the navigation track. By default, that's 2, but it can be increased to 3 or even 4 movements by progressing along this track. Movement is moving one of your units to an adjacent space or a port. Ships can only move between sea spaces or between sea spaces and ports. Land units can board a ship for free as long as it's in an adjacent port or sea space. So for 0 movement, Marty could send his land unit onto a ship. The ship's capacity is 3 units. When a ship has land units on it, it must take them with it, and it costs no extra movement to bring the land units along with it. When a ship carrying unit docks in a port, those units may choose to disembark, but it still costs them a movement each to do that. If the land units are forced to move by foot though, it costs a movement to move 1 unit from a land space to an adjacent land space, or 1 movement to move from a ship in a sea space to an adjacent land space. Now, whenever you move to a new land space, that land space is considered explored, and you reveal the resource that that land space produces, and the population tile that's on it. So before, remember, you saw a range of power that this population tile could have, 4 to 6. When it's revealed, you see that it was actually 4. And you can move a unit multiple times in the same turn. So let's look at these Rondel actions. First of all, Procure. This is how we gain new and more powerful action cards, either character cards or monument cards. When you perform the Procure action, you can procure face-up cards from the procurement area by spending the resources depicted on the cards. Sometimes the cards would like 2 resources, sometimes you've got a choice of 1 resource. The monuments require you to spend the resources on the card plus an additional marble or wood, as shown up here. Once you've paid all your costs and stopped procuring any more cards, take the procured cards directly into your hand and reveal new ones on the decks. How do we pay for things though? Well, resources can be obtained by placing one of your pillars onto resources in the spaces that your pillars are in. So if I needed a gold to procure a card, I could pop my pillar on there. I can't do it again though till my pillar's off that. Say I want this ruler card though, I also need an iron. Well, all of the cards in your hand also have a resource on them, so I could discard this blacksmith card to give me the iron that I need, and between the pillar and the discarding of the card, I would have the resources I needed to gain this card directly into my hand. And in the future when I play this, I could gain a monument card for free if I control all the land spaces in 2 regions. So that's a very ambitious card to get early, but it's just an example. And we reveal an adventurer. Move one of your land units up to 4 spaces. You'd really get them across the map. The next action is deploy. This is how we place units on the game board and give ourselves more strategic options. Here is our unit area which we can deploy from. And you can see resource costs underneath those units. You can buy as many as you want to or can afford, but there are restrictions to where these units can come out. You can deploy a hoplite to any space where you have a city or a citadel. You can deploy a worker to any space where you have a city or an agora. And you can deploy a ship to a sea space adjacent to or a port corresponding to a place where you have a city or a temple. Whenever you completely empty a row in the deploy section of your player board by deploying all of those units, you can take a face-up strategy tile with the helmet symbol on it. Looking over at the board here, you see there's always 2 in the display. So if I was to deploy all of my units from the top row here, I could choose from either strategic initiative, instead of breaking ties using the normal rules, by the person who is furthest ahead in the region, and if there's a tie on the track itself, whoever is highest up in that space breaks the tie. Well, if you've got strategic initiative, that can go out the window. You win any tie. Or I could go for archery mastery. While my units are on land spaces, they contribute at most 1 power to any adjacent land space instead of their own space. So I would take that, we would reveal a fresh one. So fortifications, each of my buildings provides 1 extra power. And this would go in this space here. If I ever get new ones in the future and I don't have space, I can remove old ones if I want to, but these cannot be moved around. So the buildings, amongst other things, can help you deploy your units in different places. But how do we get those out? The build action. This allows you to build 1 or more buildings and or cities on the game board. So to build a building, again, we've got this area down here for the build action that contains the different types of buildings: temple, agora, and citadel, and the costs for building them. Your first one is cheaper. On the bottom row here, they're more expensive. To build a building, you pay the resources required, take a building from your player board, and place it onto the game board. You can build buildings in spaces where you have no building in this land space. There is no other building of that type in this space, built by another player. You have no building of that type in the same region, and you have a worker, because someone's got to build it. So if the space was like this, I could still build one of my temples. There is a building in the space, but it's not mine, and it's not a temple. So I'd be able to build one of my temples. I would not be able to build my agora here, though. The buildings all provide different special abilities. A citadel provides 3 powers for all game purposes in the space that it's in, and you can deploy hoplites in spaces with a citadel. An agora gives you a discount of 1 resource of the resource type that's on its land space for every step you make during the ascend action that we'll get to later, and you can deploy workers to a space with an agora. A temple allows you to have 1 more mythology card above your player board than usual. At the start of the game, everyone's only got 1 space for a mythology card, but for every temple you've built, you can have an additional 1, up to a total of 3. And you can deploy ships to sea spaces and ports adjacent to where you've got a temple. Similarly to the deploy action, when you clear a row of buildings, you can take a strategy tile. So I could choose from the Architects of Prosperity. Every time I do a build action on the Rondel, I can progress on one of these 2 tracks. That's the Civilization or Navigation tracks. Or the Theatre of Dionysus. I get a 1 wine discount when energizing my mythology cards. To build a city with the build action, if there is still a city underneath the Rondel, you can spend a wine, a marble, a gold, and an iron. To build a city, take 1 from here and put it on a land space containing at least 1 of your workers and no city. And to show that you now control it, you can pop 1 of your player markers in it. Next up, we've got the settle action. This allows you to remove the population tiles from regions and place more pillars out on the game board. When you do this action, you can settle 1 or more land spaces where you have at least 1 land unit, whether it's a worker or a hoplite. If your power matches or exceeds that of the player who has the highest total in the space, and your power matches or exceeds that of any population tiles in the space. So right here, I've got 2 power from my hop, but this population tile's got 4 on it, so that's no good. But assuming you did have enough power, you would remove the population tile and take the reward that's shown on it. For defeating one of the types of barbarian camp, you can progress on the corresponding region's track. So in this case, it was a barbarian. I would be able to move on this track. If I could spend an iron, I would be able to get 1 of my extra hoplites. And then the tile goes away. Alternatively, there are population tiles that let you gain a monument card for free at the end of your turn. Rewards that let you draw 2 cards from a particular mythology deck, keeping 1 and putting it above your board. Immediately after you settle a space, if there's no pillar already there, and there are no more population tiles here either, you can place 1 of your pillars from your settle area of your board onto that space. If you don't have any left, you can move 1 of your pillars instead. Whenever you empty a row of pillars in your settle area, you guessed it, you get a strategy tile, this time with the cornucopia symbol on the back. And here we've got the Carpenters Guild and the Blacksmiths Guild. The guilds all basically double your production when you're placing pillars on resources, so you get 2 iron or 2 wood instead of just 1 for doing that. Last but not least is the Ascend action, and this is one of the ways that we progress on region tracks by spending resources to gain powerful upgrades. Each region track has a resource corresponding to it, so you need to pay that type of resource, and the number of resources you need to spend is the space that you're moving to. So I would need to spend 1 wine to go to space 1, but if I wanted to move up again, I would need to spend 2 more wine. You can do as many progressions as you want to or can afford in 1 ascend action. And you gain the rewards for every step up that you took after you finish progressing on all of the tracks. So each of the tracks corresponds to 1 of the resources: marble, wood, gold, iron. For the Titan track, you can spend any type of resource, but it's got to be the same resource if you take multiple steps in the same action. Remember, an Agora will give you a discount of the resource that's on its space for every movement you take with the Ascend action. So whether I'm moving up the military track, which wants iron, or I choose iron for the Titan track, my first movement could be free, and then I get a 1 discount on any further movements. So it'd be great to have those out here. The discount applies even if the resource has been depleted by a pillar. Now you see, as well as the resource, all of the tracks have got this Amphora next to them as well. There are various ways you can get these Amphora fragments. They could be on population tiles, they can be on mythology cards, they can be on character cards, and they can be on strategy tiles. Now, all you need to make is a complete Amphora out of the top, middle, and bottom pieces. If you're using a population tile, the Amphora tile is gone from the game once it's spent. If you're using a character card, you see it's got this red cross on it. That means once it's used as an Amphora, it's exiled from the deck. It's out of the game. When you use strategy tiles for the Amphora fragments, they're placed face down, because a set of 3 different Amphora fragments can be used to progress on any track during the Ascend action without paying its normal cost. So it could be huge. Use your Agora discount, progress loads up the Titan track to space 4, and then get your Amphora to go up to space 5 for free and get a load of cities out. Could be massive. With all of the actions covered, we move on to the end of the game. Remember, we trigger the end of the game when, at any time during their turn, a player controls 6 cities. If players have collectively reached the end of a number of region tracks equal to the number of players in the game, or when 3 Era 3 prophecy cards have been removed by being fulfilled or otherwise. Once we've triggered the end of the game, we finish the current round and then play one more full final round. So everyone's had the same number of turns, and then the player with the most glory emerges victorious. You get 1 glory for every monument, 1, 2, or 3 glory for each prophecy, depending on which era it came from, 3 glory for controlling each city, and every region you control. Before we determine the control of a region, starting with the player with the first player marker and going clockwise, each player can take one of their ships from an adjacent sea space and place it in one of the region's land spaces to indicate that they're providing that space 1 extra power. Ships already in ports aren't affected by this, they're already giving that region 2 power. Add up all of your glory, the most glory wins. If there is a tie, the player who has progressed the most across all of the tracks is the winner, and if there's still a tie, the players rejoice in their shared victory. So that is how to play the standard game, but there are extra modes. The rulebook is available right now for you to have a look at these further, but there is a Barbarian Hordes mode, where we add Barbarian tiles. They go on the Rondel, and when the player with the first player marker crosses between Ascend and Procure, Barbarian tiles go out and kind of swarm towards players building cities, pillars. And when it gets activated again, if the Barbarians have more power than you do in that city, then they'll destroy your stuff. They can be destroyed like population tiles by settling, and you draw 2 action cards for getting rid of them. You can play a 4-player team game where 2 players on each side are allied and can deploy to their partners' cities, and their scores are added up at the end. You can play the Legendary Heroes mode, as well as a starting resource and an ability tile. We can also get the choice of a starting hero, all with their special abilities. Like Heracles, your hero's power is doubled during a settle action. Theseus, your hero acts as a ship and a worker. Atalanta, your hero can move 2 spaces for the cost of 1 movement and can deplete resource tiles as if she was a pillar. There are minis associated with these heroes. They can be deployed at the cost of 2 gold, and they will help us by contributing or fighting or sieging. All sorts of ways. There is an extra trial where Atlantis is on the sea and is a very powerful city with like 10 strength to be settled. And there is a skirmish mode for if you want even more direct conflict between the players, that allow you not just to have area control and take control of other players' cities and things, but you can directly remove other players' units, buildings, and pillars from the board through fighting and that. And there is a solo mode coming too. You can find out more on the Kickstarter page. I hope you have enjoyed this, and it's given you some info as to what's going on in Pillars of Heracles. As I said, the game is on Kickstarter right now. You can click the link in the description to go to the campaign page, see all of the final stuff, and if it sounds like it's for you, you can help to make it happen. There's plenty more from me on this channel, hundreds of playthroughs. You can subscribe if you'd like to see more. You can support the channel in ways in the description too, if you're so inclined. But thank you so much for watching, and I will see you for the next game. Bye, everyone.